International Trade, Mod 4. Economic Globalization in National Economies. Economic globalization is a process of international integration of national economies, heavily influenced by the reduction of the cost of transport and communication. This integration process is constituted mainly by considerable increases in the international trade, foreign direct investment carried out by national or multinational companies, technological exchanges, flows of short-term capital, and migration of workers and their families, bringing about significant cultural changes. With economic globalization, the world becomes more interdependent. Decisions made in one country affect other political jurisdictions. Economic, but also the political, social, and cultural relations extend well beyond the existing boundaries between nation states and their effect of governments and on citizens. Economic globalization as a framework for international relations, new trends in the economy, and international taxation. In the past 30 years, a rise in the growth of international trade has encouraged the process of economic globalization, which was facilitated through the process of regional specialization. This process of regional specialization also contributed to a more efficient production in some areas of the planet, while increasing the spatial interdependence among the countries. So, to fully understand that, the global geography, on the other hand, the neutralization of national boundaries and freedom of the location, production, and consumption centers has been facilitated by the revolution in international transport, which involves a new concept of global geography. Positive aspects for the world economy. In the globalization process is a reduction of costs of transport and production in global economies of scale. Big one. The expansion of the concept of the dimensions of the consumer and producer markets, the improvement in the efficiency of production through enhancing the exploitation of the competitive advantage of nations. And in 1990 to 2015, international trade, world merchandise trade, trade growth, world GDP growth. We have a few plans. Figures are projections, of course. The other regions include Africa, Middle East, and CIS. Now, causes of international economic growth. Economic integration process. These types of processes encourage the elimination of trade barriers among groups of countries in specific areas to stimulate the commercial development at a regional level, as well as the possible links, cooperation with other economic blocs. On the other hand, the economic integration process leads to a reordering of trade flows, a rationalization of the centers of production according to a level of efficiency acquired, the first step towards supernatural scale of economy. Free trade zones. Free trade zones, acting as centers of economic development, are created through a number of special regulations to propel the activity forward, and they are characterized by the following features: the economic incentives, reduction in taxes, tax exemptions, custom duties, settling process subsidies. Orientation toward activities dedicated to exportation, positioning themselves as a center attractive for investment and foreign companies that collaborate to boost the productive structure of the country. Applications of a specific state regulation that promotes the hiring of personnel, the reduction of customs procedures, greater facility to obtain permits for the implementation in that area. Provision of infrastructures facilitating the development of the activities, layout of ground communication, strategic location, and adequate logistical networks. Production systems. The development of the logistics sector contributes to bridging the gap between the production phase and the distribution phase, which facilitates world trade in goods. Reduction in transport costs. Reduction encourages the growth of international trade, as well as the change in the location of the economic activity. One can say the globalization of international trade depends on logistics, transport, complementary services necessary to achieve high efficiency and optimum competitiveness for the international framework. These are the services that are needed to maintain economic globalization. Distribution centers, regulations, borders. Okay, let's go through it. Creating major infrastructure and terminals to concentrate the reception and departure of a large volume of goods. It is a new model and multimodal type of international transport model. International regulations through banking, financial sectors, and insurance facilitates a strategy negotiation between buyers and sellers. The borders, improvement of custom procedures, facilitating the movement of documentation, increase in legal security, cost of customs, stimulates a greater flow of goods between countries. Evolution of international trade. Phases of the model of production and transport. Phase 1, immobility of production factors. This was the first 20 years. It was a lean period, high transport costs, the number of customs restrictions on international merchandise for raw materials that are scarce in each country. Everything else is produced nationally with a more productive autonomy, regardless of the production costs. Logistics movements through the transport of bulk goods, for example, raw materials. There was not any specific infrastructure for those flows. The existing ones lacked interconnection to the final destination. Then we move to the next section, 20 years, mobility of production factors. And there was an increase in the movement of production factors due to the following causes: efficiency, concentration of production in certain sectors, improvements in custom processes, first customs integration process, greater economies of scale, lower labor costs, increase in international investment in other countries, relocation of production. Containers, yes, revolutionized logistics and international transport as they allowed the movement and handling of large quantities of merchandise to any destination in the world. Then we came to slightly less than 20 years period called globalization. Globalization, yeah, that's right. The company production chain acquired a global dimension. In just a moment. Yep. Manufactured goods became the cornerstone of international trade. New emerging powers became new centers of world production. And in this phase, logistics services became crucial in the production chain, and also they were no longer associated with national borders, giving way to door-to-door logistics flow regardless of the point of origin and the destination of the goods in question. Regional economic integration. Many countries take the initiative to integrate national and regional interests with the aim of reaching greater benefits through markets of higher dimension. The benefits related to freedom of trade would not be possible without the different states collaborating with certain levels of independence or autonomy to achieve broader forms of organization. And it could be observed how the movements of economic integration were appearing across all the continents through economic agreements that liberalized the movement of goods, workforce, capital, and services across the borders of a particular group of countries. Experts claim that the process of creating large economic blocks will lead to novel events, a new division in the international economic order, which is called suprastates, allow trade liberalization within their borders, while at the same time establishing trade barriers to the rest of the external economic groups. The levels of integration of economic integration projects, well, we'll go over those, possibly. And the levels of integration of economic integration projects. Creation of a true global economy where countries share a common currency, and establish standards that promote freedom of the movement of products, services, and production factors. National interests remain, norms regulating sector-specific liberalization are applied. The main levels of economic integration can be classified according to the degree of integration between the economies that comprise it. They will be defined in the following sections. Free trade areas, NAFTA, Mercosur. I believe that one's for South America. Anyway, it is a form of economic integration between countries which is flexible, non-restrictive, and in which the degree of integration is of low intensity. Some examples are given. Quite a few here. I know some of them. Organized. That's the one I was thinking of. So we got NAFTA and the sewer. There's quite a few there. Integration process, country by country, sections under construction. Features of the free trade area: freedom trade of goods or services between member states, and in some cases, there may be limitations of such services and goods, with the aim of protecting some specific sector of countries' involvement in the free trade zone. Regulation, the absence of quotas, barriers, taxes, customs fees between participating countries. Trade policy with non-members: each member country can establish its own trade measures with the other non-member countries. When dealing with the import-export, there is no border or exterior common customs area. And the advantages of a free trade area: the economies of scale, creation of large internal markets, efficiency of logistics, simple technique for the transport of goods established, which ensures speed and approximation of supply and consumption, and the efficiency in the market management, better access to more competitive products. There are the limitations of such a zone. Limitations of the equitable development of the economy as a whole, produced by a decrease in free trade of some member countries in certain products and services. Lack of common rules with non-member countries. There is a risk that countries which establish lower customs fees may obtain an advantage over other members. Unfair competition related to the previous point. Countries with fewer customs rates become reference points for access to the rest of the market, as in the case of Mexico, USA, and Canada. There should be procedures and regulations obligating countries to present certificates of origin requiring a minimum percentage of participation. Discrimination discrimination policies. A lack of freedom of movement of workforce capital leads to a discrimination policy, lack of efficiency on certain production factors. And the least developed countries, due to the lack of common rules governing economic activity, further structural deficiencies, or the least developed countries are strengthened. And autonomy of each country as far as the internal policy management is concerned. Monetary and fiscal policies might induce distortions in the level of trade among member countries in a free trade area, devaluation, differential inflation, taxation, subsidies of companies, etc. Now, let me see if that was being contracted. Okay. So what's this now called? Customs union. This type of economic integration enables country members to eliminate internal barriers between them, allowing free trade in goods and services the same as a free trade area. However, in this type of integration, progress is made through the creation of a common trade policy, vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Some main features are common rate sets for imports. Member countries lose the power to use a foreign custom to their advantage. The trade flows are regulated depending on the national interest. The benefits of customs unions: decision-making capabilities. Countries that belong to this type of integration have a greater decision-making capacity when facing international trade flows related to the imports and exports. And in fact, that kind of common external customs is an essential tool to protect oneself from foreign competition and thus supporting domestic production. And simplification. The structure of custom system is much simpler since it helps non-member countries in their trade relations. Limitations to a custom system: there's less autonomy. Customs union implies a loss of autonomy in terms of custom regulations, which can cause difficulties since not all countries have the same needs, and this type of integration is opposed to the divergent economic reality. And conflict: the customs union can be perceived as an aggressive way of management within international trade, so it can widen the gap between member and non-member countries. Now we come to common market. This type of economic organization, called common market, implies the following premises: the elimination of trade barriers, free trade, custom unions, mobility of the production factors, capital workforce, elimination of restrictions on migratory population, elimination of restrictions on the investment location within that territory. Here are the features. The creation of this type of economic integration implies a greater effort in coordinating the members when it comes to monetary, fiscal, and workforce policies. This extra benefit is the reason why some customs unions are only obtain an integration model based exclusively on economic issues, for example, on issues related to the free trade areas or customs union. The advantage of the common market is increased profitability in capital flows and increased efficiency of production processes. Now, the economic and monetary union of the European Union. And this last phase of the process of economic integration is the development of an economic union. At this stage, all the points of common market are met: freedom of capital movements and production factors. However, there are some additional rules. Adopting a single currency for all countries. Bingo. Homogenization of public finances, monetary policy, and fiscal policy. Adopting an organizational model under the measures of an economic union gives rise to objections from almost every country, as this means the governments need to give up managing traditional areas of power so deeply rooted in the nation-state concept. Here are the features of a European Union. The loss of autonomy in essential factors of the management of the national economy, fiscal and monetary policies, which reduces the maneuverability margins to effectively solve the specific problems of each of the national economies separately. And an overview: the economic union represents an overview where measures are not representative of the interests of all nations, but rather respond to the general interests that will benefit the whole in the medium long term. Now we come to the advantages of economic union. Economic policies: greater rigor in the policies. Therefore, there's widespread consolidation of national finances and business fabric of every nation. And competitiveness: monetary policy. There is an improvement in competitiveness related to the monetary policy. The introduction of a single currency means that less developed countries move forward and that there is no longer a place for the manipulation of the national currency. Inflation: that there's an improvement in competitiveness in relationship to inflation. The introduction of a single currency and the fight against inflation help to maintain a more balanced and controlled level of inflation and prices, which contributes to the increase in the competitiveness of domestic production. The monetary strength: the incorporation of the strong currency promotes greater security in national economic transactions, in addition to a reduction of financial costs together with international solvency. Now comes the disadvantages. a single currency. The addition of a single overly strong currency minimizes competitiveness for exports and domestic products. Taxation. In the context of monetary union, there is a lack of fiscal autonomy, which implies a greater shortage of the basic tool of protection for domestic production. This can be an impediment to some less competitive sectors, or the ones involved in early stages of production and research, that sort of thing. And inflation. Monetary policies applied in a very strict way and oriented towards controlling inflation prevents members from acting extravagantly in times of low economic growth, in which would be advisable to boost production. So now we come to the reality of the economic integration policies. Now we will take a look at the causes of a series of disadvantages or failures that have arisen through the process of economic integration and have not been beneficial for the process. Economic instability. The usual economic instability, that is to say, inflation, devaluation, corruption, flight of capital hinder among obtaining a minimum sign of rigor in economic integration. National autonomy. There is a need to maintain national autonomy with respect to key aspects of the economy, such as the monetary and taxation system, and in addition, these aspects are typical in the important economic decisions of each nation. Now we come to the difficulty of coordination. There is a latent difficulty in achieving the coordination of all the interests of each country in relationship to all sectors that participate. The diversity of economic development is the next one. There is diversity in the level of economic development of the countries that have chosen to be introduced in the process of economic integration. The level of development in each country is, in most cases, a great impediment to transferring basic aspects in the negotiation process. So currently, the model of globalized economy implies the necessity of participation of all countries in processes of economic integration, since there's big issues of international economics negotiation. They're under authority of areas of economic integration with a decisive weight in the global economies. This means that these issues of international economic negotiation do not belong to nation states as in the past. So now we're going to be looking at some tangible consequences of the process of integration. And the increase in productivity in a market in which production factors have freedom of mobility, an increase in the productivity of the national economies can take place. This is possible mainly because there is a movement of capital and workforce towards the country of the zone of economic integration where higher levels of productivity are obtained. And it should be pointed out that this freedom of mobility does not benefit all countries in the same way, because capital and workforce are impacted by economic principles that sometimes do not correspond to the needs of a country in the long run. For this reason, the national capital of a country with less wealth is directed towards those countries of the economic integration that have a higher profitability and investment stability. Moreover, it is usual that the free movement of labor may force the qualified personnel from country with less wealth to immigrate to richer countries with better wages and more opportunities for growth. Lower prices of imports. Small country, custom tax, product goes up, imports go down. We will discuss that in our next part. International trade, module 4, part B, lower prices of imports. Small country, custom tax, product price up, imports down. When a group of companies establishes a custom fee for a foreign product, the demand for the good also decreases. Since there is a large volume of imports, it can force the country that exports to reduce the price in order to make up for the loss in that specific market. This leads to a reduction in the final price to the consumer within a common customs policy. Creation of trade and trade diversion. Jacob Wiener was an economist specialized in international trade, a university professor and advisor to the state secretary during World War II. He was working on issues related to war and foreign affairs, and Jacob was the first business personality in the world of foreign trade to analyze in detail the advantages and disadvantages of economic integration processes, especially analyzing the case of the customs union and its impact on international trade flows. And here's what he concluded. He concluded that the process of economic integration of customs union implies the creation and increase of the commercial movements among the countries that make up this union, which can lead to a decrease in the price of the final products that reaches the consumer. And it is included that the customs union can lead to a diversion of previous trade flows, replacing external trade with new custom partners. And this fact does not imply an increase in growth or wealth, but can bring about a change in the competitive advantage of business countries, developing greater inefficiency in the use of resources. Emerging countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China are those that experience a rapid economic growth related not only to domestic product, but also the marked increase in trade relations with other countries. The term emerging countries coined in the 1980s by Anthony van Atmeel, a World Bank official and founding director of the Emerging Markets Management. who defines an emerging country as an economy with a low or middle income per capita certain characteristics. Here are the characteristics that the economic risks are higher than those of developed countries. For example, devaluation, state intervention, change of legal regulation, and so on, and that there's an increase in the investment, either local or foreign, which shows that it is an attractive market with stable structures. They are immersed in a process of transition and in the situation of opening markets, internationalization, and product programs of structural reforms. And the growth rate is more or less high, which enables the prediction of a future with an average level of per capita and increased gross domestic product. Emerging countries currently refer to countries Chile, Mexico, Turkey, South Africa, Vietnam, and Algeria now. Features that all of them possess are very different rates of population, economic growth, size, strategy, and business structure. Brazil, Russia, India, and China are a sector country of countries that belong to a set of emerging countries referred to as the acronym BRIC. The sector of the countries is crucial within the international economic framework. These countries are similar to the rest of the emerging countries in some respects, but at the same time they are different because they represent 40% of the world's population, they represent 15% of the global GDP. The economies of each of them grows in value by rates high enough to produce an alteration in the balance of international power. Some economists compare the nature of the BRIC companies with the promotion and acceleration of the company of the United States at the end of the 19th century. And the BRIC countries will become the global economic powers in the 21st century, according to experts. In the following image, the fundamental characteristics of the BRIC countries will be analyzed. Growth rates in emerging and developed markets are converging. GDP growth, there was a little drop there. 2019, everything crashed pretty much. Emerging markets GDP growth, they also dropped, but but they're good. Anyway, international trade, as far as trade is concerned, each of the countries that make up the BRIC sector has specialized in a specific market. China, the manufacturing, India, services, of course, Brazil, industry and raw materials, and Russia in raw materials. China, manufacturing industry, exerts its influence among all sectors of the industrial market. Its companies have acquired a high level of competitive advantage that has helped a great number of foreign investment. China, with its status as a world factory, has become a country that produces very low percentage of added value and products of high technological innovation components. Russia, known for its raw materials, sectorial structure specialized in Russia entails added vulnerability to international trade flows since the price of their exports are unstable. However, Russia has resources that accelerate the growth of all the ratios of the company thanks to high prices. Brazil, both industry and raw materials, is strong in national industry in the aeronautics and economic sectors, automotive sector, and it presents a more varied structure with energy and agricultural products. China and Brazil, well, as for the export sector, China and Brazil have a strong economic base and national competitive advantages to move into the international market, suppressing the devaluation of the national currency. Now we look for infrastructure. The potential and development of infrastructure are a very important variable for the evolution of the BRIC countries. The large geographical size of all of them show the necessity of building a large infrastructure to meet demand and respond optimally to the needs, and thus foster the economic growth of the country. This large area of territory has led to the centralization, concentration, and specialization of certain productive sectors. For as Sao Paulo in Brazil, Bombay in India, coastal zone in China, and the metropolitan areas of Russia, it resulted in large tracts of the territory of these countries being exempted from overall growth and development, leading to great contrast. An adequate structuring of the territory is necessary to continue the chain of growth and to achieve stabilization and national balance. Regarding this sector, it is China that is striving to invest in the modernization of roads, railways, maritime transport, and aviation infrastructure. Other countries lack global vision and responsibility concerning this matter. Energy resources. In terms of the energy resources, there is a complementary fragmentation among the four countries that make up the BRIC. China and India, they're quite large consumers, and then China and Brazil, exporters of energy resources. In the case of China and India, both countries show an external dependency and a decisive search for energy resources. This is due to the characteristic development model marked by great energy inefficiency. The search for energy resources leads to an alteration of the price of raw materials in international scene and may involve other countries in terms of global development and even the country itself. Now, in the case of Russia and Brazil, well, they are a leading country and they're a very attractive market for foreign century companies. It is a great energy center among the BRIC countries, as it has produced abundant financial resources for the country in recent years. However, this excess of resources includes a rentier economy model called monoculture. This model does not promote the diversification of the economy and makes the price oscillation of the raw materials that are exported quite vulnerable. Brazil, on the other hand, is a more balanced member of the BRIC, thanks to the greater diversification of the offer and demands for energy and the forecast of growth of the products that bring competitive advantage, and that would be oil. Now we come to the social structure, the importance of the middle class, a stable economic development model, and higher rates of economic growth, social welfare for corporations, emergence of the middle class. Traits of countries with the middle class: they have an international consumer market, they're achieving stability in their domestic consumption market, for example, the dynamism of the economy, and they have social stability. In the case of the BRIC countries, they manifest a significant delay regarding the balance of social fabric, explained with the following schemas. Brazil, the greater social inequalities and poverty. China, communist regime, production is concentrated geographically in rural and urban. Russia's communist regime, again, the privatization process is inequitable, and widespread in India, widespread poverty and social division by castes. It's a religious thing. So, by 2025, the objectives and projects show that the large percentage of the population in these countries will reach the position of the middle class. This will involve a large international economic development due to an increase in the rate of purchasing power and an increase in the impact on the world's markets. Now we're looking at populations with incomes between 6,000 and 30,000. Across the world, there's this blue number. It's very work outside of China is this, whereas China is moving up, and so is India. Millions in the BRIC to enter middle class bracket by 2020. And what we have here is 2020 figures, much larger number for the BRICS. Okay. Economic growth. Well, international economic order will experience a dramatic and progressive change with respect to the future project of the growth rate. Several studies of large institutions declare that the forecasts of the economic growth rates of GDP in the next few years indicate that India will be the country with the greatest potential growth, and also with a stable and sustainable rate throughout the world. The economic growth rate trends in the 21st century are as follows. The G6, USA and Japan are within the 6 world countries. There they are: USA, Japan, Germany, UK, France, Italy. The GDP forecasts that China's GDP may exceed Germany's. India can become the 3rd world economic power. And I don't mean 3rd world, I mean the 3rd world economic power. Russia will surpass Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy in a GDP. This is what the thought is. Where the BRIC versus the G6. In less than 40 years, the economies of the BRIC countries will surpass the total GDP of the G6. At the present, the BRIC countries represent 15% of the G6. The forecast is suggesting that by 2025, they will have reached 50%. And here comes now the G7. But there's a G7. Yes, notice how Russia's been left out there. The consequence of this new global economic order will be the following: the displacement of the international financial system, reserve currencies, international reserves accepted, the new opportunities for BRIC members in different sectors linked with more developed countries, such as the service and infrastructure sectors, new consumer markets with an optimum and necessary size to market, a trend in production and international marketing system, variation in external trade flows through implementing better better importing activity in those countries, and a great attraction of international investment thanks to the development of global financial systems. Here now is the international geostrategy. The emergence of the new world economic leaders are also new power strategies at the international economic relations level. And they can be summarized as follows. With Brazil, GDP up and per capita income up, strengthening the role of the regional leader in the Latin American sphere, as well as fostering the development of the most important region partners, which are Argentina and Chile. Brazil will reinforce balanced economic relations with the neighboring northern countries, as well as transform itself into a new gateway for Latin American countries. In Russia, there will be a balance in the relationships between Europe and Russia, leading to an economic integration. Russia will perform more proactive functions within the business framework of the regional areas of the former Soviet republics. Due to the geographical pyramid of Russia, it will achieve a higher income per capita of all of the BRIC countries, which will boost the development of the European investment in it. Different sectors of its country, satisfying the market's demand for domestic consumption, which is at a higher acquisitive level. Now, when we come to India, it has the highest GDP growth rate within the BRIC countries, favorable geographic pyramid, and specialization in services. And this boosts the role of India in international economic and financial markets. Modernization. India is likely to become the world leader in different subsections of the tertiary sector: computer science, technology, industry, finance, etc. India will become a power that will attract investments in more developed countries, economies, especially when it comes to the sector that it rests on the BRIC countries have not taken into account in terms of their economic development. The specialization of the tertiary sector, rise of the middle class, and the emergence of good markets for exceptional dimensions. China. Now let's look at China. China is known for the prominently exporting nature, which makes it one of the most important countries in the Asian region, and in this way, even ever closer relationships with the rest of Asian countries will be strengthened. The increase in the per capita income of a large part of the population implies an increase in demand for domestic product. Therefore, it contributes to a smaller volume of exports. China will become a world power with a significant impact on the economy at the international level: market consumption, stability, trading of currencies, interest rates, rates of inflation, financial flows, etc. And the high volume of reservations at the international level of China will boost the expansion of the overseas business projects, so that the Chinese currency will become referenced in the international financial framework. Now look at the threats and the weaknesses. Brazil, a little opening, a reduction in the economic growth can occur since Brazil has less efficiency in domestic industrial production, and the country is less open to international trade. Integration in South America, well, its own regional problem, as well as that of the relationship with other countries, Colombia and Venezuela, can lead to the impairment of international position and difficulties when structuring a process of integration of South America through the Mercosur Union. Part 3, public finance. Brazil has positive figures regarding the public finances. However, it bears massive imbalances associated with the inflation rate and the volume of debt. Therefore, it is recommended to establish a regulating strategy. Social inequalities. The strong social inequalities cannot be reduced despite economic growth, which slows down the rise of the middle class. The population pyramid. Russian population is aging. By reversing the population pyramid, which results in a decrease in the total population. This entails a decline in the economic growth and the rise of social charges. Lack of control. There is no regulation concerning the process of privatization, a low opening to some sectors, and inefficient drafting of clear rules governing the laws of markets. All this will be a clear competitive disadvantage. Rentier importer model. As in other countries which are rich in natural resources, the high price of raw materials and the lack of international economy activities may be the cause of a renter imported economic development model, which may limit the growth of the country. I've got to look that up. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, the renter-importer model, as far as I can get from AI, is the countries which are high in raw materials, they give tax breaks to foreign investors who come in, and so you get a lot of people just buying up property in the area. I guess this is what they were talking about earlier, and you're importing a lot of goods. I can't go beyond that at the moment. That's the countries with which the high price of raw materials, lack of national economy may cause a renter-importer economic, which may limit the growth of the country. Okay. Anyway, the absence of a middle class, as in the case of Brazil, economic growth has not been extrapolated to all layers of the population, precluding the rise of a middle class. National policies. Due to the circumstances of the situation, there is a need to increase and improve national policies on infrastructure, education, and training. The energy sector is a larger energy reserves that become a disadvantage when the swings in prices in the international market cannot be controlled and when there is a meager development of the other productive countries. India. Now, its problems are a imbalance of the trade balance. There is a massive dependency on energy resources and at the same time on the import of the raw materials from agriculture, which implies a huge trade imbalance. At the same time, there's a lack of these products within the international framework to stabilizes the country's development because India does not have a good level of currency reserves as, for example, China. Demographics. India is mostly a young population. This feature is an opportunity for development, but it's also at the same time a weakness if specific programs with the necessary resources are not established. Social structure. The social structure in India is very complex and it complicates the introduction of fundamental elements of the growth of a modern country. And I think they're referring again to the caste system. Environmental difficulties. A high rate combined with the disorganized growth population density leads to serious problems related to the environment, contributing to an impediment of future economic growth. Now we come to China. China, the workforce. The labor force has about 300 million people who are not incorporated into the new economy's labor market. This high percentage of people require constant growth rates in the coming years so as to able to absorb this workforce. A change in the situation could mean conflict for the economy as a whole. And then there's a population pyramid. China also represents a clearly aging population. Situation can lead to difficulties in the country's growth, significant increase in social charges, public accounts, less investment, marked decrease in productivity, lack of resources to maintain a rate of economic growth, and inability to maintain the competitive advantage of the same level of international trade. Now, the economic dependence. China still depends on various sectors such as energy and food. A disproportionate increase in the consumption of these products could lead to a blockage due to the lack of raw materials or because of the decrease in national production. In the labor market, China has a great competitive advantage, which is a cheap workforce and working conditions that are highly competitive in comparison to other countries. If there was an increase in the per capita income and the increase of the middle class, it could result in a drastic change in the labor market, wages increases, changes in business culture, improvement of working conditions, and this would lead to a loss of some of the competitive advantages related to the labor market, and thus a reduction in the intensity of trade flows that are exported in the Chinese economy. And then we come to the environment. China has the worst environmental situation, which is due to the high population density. The business network dedicated to industrial production and ecological measures are required to achieve a more sustainable development model.